Welcome to part 4 of our Flutter Notes app series. In this video, we'll be covering designing Notes cards, create separate widget for Notes card, enhance Notes app UI. Designing Notes cards. Designing Notes cards is one of the most essential parts of developing a Notes app, as this directly influences both the user experience and the visual appeal of your application. In the context of a digital notes application, a note card is essentially the visual representation of a single note item. It contains elements such as a title, a snippet or body of the note, the timestamp, and potentially some interactive icons like delete, edit, or favorite. How you design and structure these cards directly impacts how intuitive and delightful your app is to use. Let's go deeper into the theory and visual logic behind crafting effective and attractive notes cards in a Flutter application. The goal of designing a note card isn't just to present information, it's about organizing data in a way that feels organic to the user. It needs to be both space efficient and aesthetically pleasing. In many mobile applications, particularly those that focus on productivity or personal data management, the interface must walk a fine line between functionality and visual clutter. You want each note card to look clean and readable, yet not so plain that it becomes unmemorable or difficult to differentiate. One of the most important principles to understand in UI design is visual hierarchy. This refers to the arrangement and presentation of elements in a way that implies importance. In the context of a note card, you might prioritize the note's title by increasing its font size or making it bold, while keeping the description smaller or lighter. The timestamp, which is usually the least critical piece of information, can be subtly placed at the bottom or in a corner with a lighter text color. Through font weights, colors, paddings, and positioning, you're able to guide the user's eye across the card in a predictable and effective pattern. The layout of a note card also needs to account for different screen sizes. Mobile responsiveness is vital. Whether someone is using a small device or a large tablet, your card should adapt gracefully. This includes text wrapping correctly, elements not being cut off, and spacing being maintained. A well-designed card is one that maintains consistency and elegance regardless of the screen dimensions. This also brings into consideration the use of dynamic height and width rather than fixed values. When you structure your layout based on content and screen constraints rather than hard-coded sizes, you ensure that the card scales properly across devices. Another important consideration when designing note cards is touch interactivity. Every card should provide clear feedback when tapped or interacted with. Whether the user is selecting a note, swiping it to delete, or tapping a menu icon to see more options, the card needs to respond intuitively. Incorporating subtle animations, like elevation changes on tap or shadow effects, can help make these interactions feel more natural and satisfying. These micro-interactions not only enhance the user experience but also increase the perceived performance of your app. Color theory and theming play a substantial role in the visual design of note cards. Depending on your app's design direction, you might choose a light, minimal aesthetic or a bold, colorful look. In either case, consistency in your color usage is key. Each card might use the same background color, or, if you're implementing categories or tags, different cards could use different accent colors. However, contrast is critical. Text must remain readable against any background color. Using shadows and borders sparingly can help visually separate one card from another, especially in a grid layout. Padding and margin, the invisible space around and inside each note card, are unsung heroes of good UI design. The right spacing ensures that content doesn't feel cramped and makes the card easier to interact with. This includes padding between the edge of the card and its content, internal padding, as well as the space between one card and another, external margin. When done right, it makes the layout feel breathable and accessible, enhancing legibility and touch accuracy. Scalability is another key factor. As your app grows and users begin to create dozens or hundreds of notes, your card design should still hold up. This includes handling long text, managing overflow, and potentially showing indicators when content is clipped. You may also consider progressive disclosure, showing just the title and first line of a note, for instance, and expanding the content only when tapped. This helps avoid overwhelming the user with too much information at once while still keeping everything accessible. Accessibility should never be an afterthought in card design. Ensuring high color contrast, adequate text size, and screen reader compatibility can go a long way in making your app usable for a broader audience. Including semantic labels for each part of the note card and structuring the layout logically helps those using assistive technologies to navigate and interact with your app effectively. Design systems and componentization play a vital role in keeping your code base maintainable. Instead of creating a note card layout multiple times in different places, it's best to turn the card into a reusable widget. This makes your code cleaner, more efficient, and easier to modify later. If you ever want to change the look or behavior of the cards, you only have to do it in one place. This also helps ensure consistency across your entire application. Lastly, don't forget the emotional impact of your design. Even in a productivity app, small touches like smooth transitions, rounded corners, or subtle gradients can add polish and warmth that improve the user's emotional connection to the app. The goal is to make users not only find your notes cards functional but also enjoyable to interact with. To summarize, designing notes cards is a multi-dimensional process that includes visual layout, responsiveness, interactivity, accessibility, and emotional engagement. It is one of the most important elements of a Notes app's user interface and contributes heavily to how users perceive and engage with the product. Taking the time to carefully plan and execute the design of these cards ensures that your application is not only functional but also delightful to use. Create separate widget for Notes card. In application development using Flutter, one of the most powerful and scalable practices you can adopt is componentization, the process of breaking down your UI into smaller, reusable widgets. When building a Notes app, the note card itself is a perfect candidate for this approach. Creating a separate widget for your note card is not just about keeping things clean, it's about building your app in a way that is modular, maintainable, and ready to scale as your project grows in complexity. When we talk about creating a separate widget for the notes card, we're essentially abstracting a piece of UI that performs a specific function, in this case, displaying a single note, into its own standalone unit. This widget should encapsulate all the logic, layout, and styling necessary to represent a single note, without relying on the rest of the screen to function properly. This modularity is a cornerstone of good software architecture, as it allows different pieces of the UI to evolve independently. The first and most immediate benefit of creating a separate widget is code reusability. Rather than writing the same block of layout code over and over again in various parts of your app where a note needs to be displayed, you simply use your custom note card widget. This not only reduces duplication but also keeps your code dry, a core principle in software development which stands for don't repeat yourself. In practical terms, if tomorrow you want to update the padding, typography, or add a new visual indicator to your note card, you only have to make the change in one location. Another compelling reason for separating the note card into its own widget is code readability. Flutter widgets tend to get long quickly, especially when nested. When you're building complex UI with multiple elements, like rows, columns, icons, text, and more, your build method can become cluttered and hard to follow. By extracting this code into its own class or function, you keep your primary UI files clean and focused. Developers and collaborators can understand the purpose of each screen at a glance without getting lost in the details of a deeply nested widget tree. There's also the concept of encapsulation in object-oriented programming, which translates beautifully to UI components. Your note card widget can manage its own internal state, if needed, apply its own constraints, and handle its own interactions. This means the rest of your app doesn't need to know or care about how the note card works under the hood. For example, if you later decide to animate the card or add gesture recognition, you can do so within the card widget without modifying the parent layout that uses it. Scalability is another key advantage. As your app grows and you start implementing new features like filtering, theming, user customization, or multi-device support, having discrete, self-contained widgets simplifies the process. You might create different variations of your note card widget to accommodate different use cases, one for list view, another for grid view, perhaps even a compact version for smaller screens. Having this architecture in place from the beginning saves enormous time and effort down the road. From a testing perspective, a separate widget also makes unit and widget testing much easier. Rather than having to run tests on an entire screen or app, you can isolate and test just the note card component. This leads to faster test cycles and more precise diagnostics. If there's a rendering issue or interaction bug, you can pinpoint and resolve it within the note card widget without having to navigate through layers of unrelated UI. Creating a separate widget also aligns well with theming and design system consistency. If your app uses a central theme or design guide, your custom widget can reference theme properties like colors, font styles, and padding, ensuring that all note cards behave consistently. This avoids situations where you manually style each instance of a note card and risk introducing inconsistencies in appearance or behavior. Additionally, separating the widget is extremely helpful when working in collaborative environments. If multiple developers are working on the app, it allows parallel development. One developer can work on improving or enhancing the note card while another focuses on building the screen or logic that consumes that widget. This separation of responsibilities increases team efficiency and reduces the chances of merge conflicts or tightly coupled code. Let's not overlook performance optimization. In Flutter, widgets are lightweight, and the framework encourages composition over inheritance. By creating a separate widget, Flutter can better optimize your widget tree. If a state change happens somewhere else in the UI, Flutter doesn't need to rebuild the entire card if it's been properly isolated. This selective rebuilding helps with memory usage and frame rendering times, which is especially important as the number of notes grows in your app. Another practical benefit is version control and rollback safety. If you have your note card isolated in its own file and structure, it's easier to manage changes over time. You can track when something was modified, revert changes quickly, or even experiment with new versions of the component without disrupting the entire screen layout. Finally, when it comes to user interaction, such as tapping, long pressing, swiping, or dragging the card,